Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Have you ever wondered what a dog was thinking? I know I have. And amazingly, today's guest has some answers. Dr. Gregory Berns is a neuroscientist who holds both a doctorate in medicine as well as a PhD in biomedical engineering. He is a professor of psychology at Emory University and has found a way to comfortably place dogs in functional MRI machines to discover what areas of their brains are active in the face of various cues. His book, How Dogs Love Us, is a Wall Street Journal bestseller, and it has been heralded by multiple media outlets, including the Boston Globe, which said it explains why our two species have lived together so long and happily. As for me, I say it is utterly fascinating and highly recommended to anyone who loves dogs or is curious about their behavior. So join Greg and me as we have a lively conversation about how dogs think. Dr. Gregory Berns, who has asked me to call him Greg, welcome to Super Psyched.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So you and I have a lot in common. We both love animals and have learned a lot from being around them, have inferred a lot of meaning from what they do. You've gone a step further and actually, beyond inference, decided to look into objectively, what is my dog thinking? How is he feeling? Does he love? And I'm just wondering, before we even go down that path, can you share the role that animals have played in your life?
Oh, sure. I've grown up with animals really through my whole life. They've been there probably, maybe with the exception of when I was in college. But I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in a town called San Juan Capistrano, which is kind of it's like a little island of ruralness, I guess, in Orange County. So my family grew up with horses and dogs. And so that was just kind of what it was in the 70s when I grew up. And so I guess maybe I assimilated that, and I'm not sure. But I think I've always felt a strong bond towards dogs. And through my adult life, they've always been present. And it was kind of only in recent years that I was able to merge that love really for animals with kind of my profession and what I do for a living.
Yeah, so I've read your book. Actually, more accurately, I listened to it twice on Audible, loved it, and that's why you're here. And I've got to know, for the sake of the audience, what compelled you to study the emotional lives of dogs as well as their capacity to love?
It's a long story. Like a lot of things in science, it was not something I set out to do with any particular design other than just, straight up curiosity. So the origins of the Dog Project, as I called it for a long time, go back to 2011. And so what I was doing at the time was really using brain imaging technologies to study human cognition. And I forget what I was studying in the human world at the time. Probably it was something to do with human decision-making. At the time, I had been involved in a field called neuroeconomics, which was really the use of brain imaging technologies to understand human decision-making. So we had been studying things like reward processing and risk tolerance. I was also interested in things like sacred values and how things like abstract values, whether it's politics or religion or ethnic identity, kind of can guide people's decisions, how they get represented in people's heads. And then what happened was, this is a true story, bin Laden was killed. And I think I'm pretty safe in saying that what I took away from that was probably different than what everyone else did. And what I took away was when I saw that there was a dog on the mission, there were all these pictures of military dogs in the press at the time. And I saw these pictures of dogs jumping out of helicopters and just doing all this crazy stuff. And I thought, man, if a dog can be trained to jump out of a helicopter, then why can't we train a dog to go in an MRI? Because they're about as loud as each other. And then that was it. I mean, that was like, okay, I guess nobody has done this. Let's figure out how to do it. And I started with my own dog.
So what intrinsically was so captivating about putting a dog in the MRI? What did you, that's an investment. That's, to use an economics term, that is really an opportunity cost, a real time suck. How did you decide to use your precious time to do that?
Oh, I don't see it as an opportunity cost. I mean, it's actually, I can't think of any more enjoyable thing to do really than, getting to take my dog to work and having her do things that I do and be part of my life. I didn't really have any goal at the time. It was, the motivation was, okay, I've grown up with dogs. I've lived with dogs. These dogs are part of my life. How can you not wonder what they're thinking?
Totally.
Is it all about the food? Do they hang around us just because we feed them? Or is there something more to it than that? For lack of a better word, do they love us? And anything like, we would conceive that word between humans. And so initially that wasn't my question. The first question was, gee, can we do this in the first place? Can we get a dog to go into a scanner voluntarily with no anesthesia, no sedation, no restraints, just participate like a human would, and see if we can get usable data from her brain or his brain? That was the first question. And it turned out not to be as hard as you might think. I was lucky. I mean, a lot of these things are always luck, right? I was lucky to have a dog that was suited to doing this. So the dog I had at the time, I had two dogs at the time. I had a golden retriever, and then we had a little rat terrier that had been adopted from the Humane Society the year before. So she was young. She was probably about 1.5 years old, and her name is Callie. And I don't know, she is just kind of very much a terrier and very kind of task oriented and just exploratory and love to learn to do things. Very easy to train. And then so I teamed up with a local dog trainer who was also interested in trying this crazy idea out and trying to figure out, okay, well, let's work through the process and see how to do it. We'll just figure it out.
You and I both think this is a very important subject. And when I was saying opportunity cost, it could have been an opportunity cost if you hadn't garnered such great data, and if they weren't willing to do it, but you were so successful. But I really do appreciate the idea that you don't view it as an opportunity cost at all. That said, I imagine, in spite of the fact that you and I are both exuberant about this idea, I mean, I don't read books twice unless I absolutely adore them, and you've encountered a lot of support in this pursuit of studying dogs, and you experienced the rough equivalent of eye rolls from this verbal equivalent of eye rolls from a lot of people. And I'm just wondering, what have people's reactions been to when you say, this is what I'm studying?
Well, there's two ways to answer that. And I guess it kind of depends on the time frame that we're talking about.
Sure.
So, 10 years ago, almost, when I started this, my colleagues were like, what the hell are you doing? I had a very successful research career studying humans, lots of grant funding to study that. And now I'm going off half cocked to study dogs. And dogs in science it's not a thing, or it wasn't a thing for a long, long time. For a variety of reasons, researchers do not use dogs in research, in part because they're people's pets. And nobody likes to talk about doing animal research on dogs. I mean, we can talk about other animals, but certainly not dogs. It has, that fell out of favor, in the 50s, really. So there's that. And then there's kind of also the long-standing bias in science that dogs are somehow corrupted because they've been domesticated and they don't really represent, kind of the natural world, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually kind of I take the opposite view. I think that if we're interested in studying other animals, in part to understand ourselves, I think dogs are the best animal to study for several reasons. The first is they're the only animal that really lives with us. And so they're the only animal that shares our social environment in a way that really could be called intimate. And, over the thousands of years that dogs have lived with humans, they have adapted to our lives in very particular ways. So understanding what has happened and what has made them what they are is, I think, crucial to understanding ourselves as well as us, living happier lives. Because, I like to say, a dog is everyone's friend. And, wouldn't we all like to be like that?
Yeah. In many ways, they exemplify some of humankind's best behavior.
But to answer your question, yeah, most of my colleagues didn't really understand why I would do this. And then even after our first experiments where we got Callie to actually sit in the scanner and sit still, we used food rewards to coax her in and see how her brain responded to food rewards. Not because that's intrinsically interesting. That at that point it was just a proof of concept. So we wanted to make sure that it elicited what we call a reward response, and it did. And so kind of the reactions were, well, great, you've shown that dogs like hot dogs and treats. But that was really the beginning of it, because then once we laid the foundation, we expanded the project and kind of had just a word of mouth open call for people in Atlanta who wanted to participate with their dogs and how to train them for MRI and potentially see what they're thinking. And then once we got more dogs involved, they turned out, some of them turned out to be just fabulous at sitting in the scanner, real couch potatoes, if you will. And so now what we're doing we've done all the easy things. Now what we're doing are adapting human experiments of cognition to a dog and seeing how dogs perform on very similar things that humans are doing. And so now it's gotten very sophisticated in terms of what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to understand how dogs see the world, how they process social cues amongst humans as well as other dogs, and understand language, for example. We're really trying just to crack it wide open.
And in your initial study, what were some of your findings?
So the initial study, after we did the proof of concept, we kind of quickly moved on to social questions. And so one of the early questions, which took several years to finally get an answer to, was this question of, are dogs in it just for the food? Or do they have something like love for us? And so the way we set that experiment up was, at this point in time, we had probably a dozen dogs who were trained for MRI. And we simply presented them with cues that we had previously trained them on. And one cue, and these were just toys we would hold up on sticks. One cue was always followed by a treat. And then the other cue was followed by the owner popping in view and just praising the dog, or just saying, good girl, something like that. And so what we were interested in was, in particular, the reward system. Was it responding more to the prospect of food, or was it responding more to the prospect of praise? And what we found was that in the majority of dogs, roughly 3/4 of the dogs had at least equal responses to the prospect of praise as to the prospect of food. And then a subset of those, roughly maybe about 15%, had an even greater response to the praise than food.
To what would you attribute that response? That's an interesting one. Greater dopaminergic, I'm guessing, energy response to praise than the actual food?
Well, so these are anticipatory responses. So the way we set these experiments up is that there's a cue, and so it's while they're anticipating that thing, that's the thing that we're measuring, because we can't really get a response to the food itself because they're moving their head when they eat a treat. But the anticipation is strongly associated, we think, with the actual response. So what it comes down to is what psychologists call individual differences. So early on in the experiments, we would often publish our average findings. You take a dozen dogs, and then here's what the average response looks like. But as in human studies, I think a lot of the interesting findings are in the details of how people differ from each other. And same with dogs. So the interesting question is, well, are all dogs this way, or is it just some dogs? And then you can kind of think of this as a continuum where, yeah, I mean, dogs are like people; they are individuals, and if you've lived with any number of dogs, you know that they have personalities and temperaments, and they're not at all the same. And so, indeed, that's what we find when we're looking at the brain, that there is a spectrum. Some dogs are just they couldn't care less about working for food. They are in it for the relationship with their person. And then there are chow hounds. There are dogs who really only care about the food.
And what is predictive of these differences? Is it breed? Is it the way they're raised? Is it genetic?
We don't know because, I mean, we've had a range of breeds, and we've never found a correlation with breed. But it's hard to answer that question because there are so many breeds out there. There's over 100 breeds, and there's no way to really do that kind of statistical analysis in a study like this. So, but what I can tell you, which is the flip side of it, is that we have done studies of individual breeds. So after that experiment, we teamed up with an organization called Canine Companions for Independence, CCI, which breeds and trains service dogs, and they're actually headquartered in Santa Rosa. So we teamed up with them to see if we could use the fMRI to predict which dogs might be good service dogs. And those dogs are all, they're either golden retrievers or Labrador retrievers, but most of them are crosses between the two. So as far as breed goes, they're pretty much identical. They're pretty much all cut from the same cloth. And yet, even there, we see a range of brain responses. We see a range of behaviors and motivations. So I can tell you, even within a breed, there's huge variations. And so ultimately, I just come down to the fact that dogs are individuals.
Sure. And that's a really great point. Probably a common misperception is that we can kind of take these broad brushstrokes when we look at canines in general. And what you're saying is very similar to the Kinsey study on sexuality. There's a huge spectrum on what constitutes normal, these individual differences, and that each one is like a snowflake. They're individuals. They're not just dogs.
That's right. And so when people ask me, does my dog love me? My answer nowadays is like, well, I don't know. I don't know you or your dog.
You would need to see, I mean, to answer that question more fully, I'm guessing you'd need to see the two of them in an fMRI.
Exactly.
In terms of our tendency to anthropomorphose, we might have thought, of course dogs love us, or we might have thought, oh, well, I'm skeptical. Dogs couldn't possibly love in the human way. And yet you have evidence that dogs do love in a way that is consistent with the way humans show love. Can you speak about that?
Sure. The area of the brain that we've been studying, it's an area of the brain called the caudate nucleus or the nucleus accumbens. And as you mentioned, these are the regions that are richest in dopamine receptors. Now, we have to be careful because dopamine does not equal pleasure or reward or love. So we're kind of painting in broad brushstrokes here. But we do know from human studies, when we study people in the scanner and we show them pictures of loved ones, and there's some variation here, whether we're talking about romantic love or kind of parent-child love or, platonic love, you do see activity in these same structures in humans. So we think what we're seeing is not the human representation of love in a dog's brain, because humans, the word doesn't do justice to the nuances of the types of love humans experience. So what we think we're measuring are kind of what we call the positive affective or the positive hedonic aspects of love in a dog. And we see that it's located in the same part of the brain as humans. And so to the skeptics out there, I can say minimally, we can say that there is a positive response in the dog's brain when, in the case of the food praise experiment, the dog's expecting to be praised. They're expecting a social interaction with their human. Is that love as a human would understand it? It's like, no, not entirely, but I think there's a commonality at the core.
And what would you say to the people who would say, oh, unequivocally, I know my dog loves me. I can feel it. We're nearly symbiotic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you have to be careful when you do that because we humans anthropomorphize everything. We anthropomorphize inanimate objects. Clearly, there is a relationship between humans and dogs, and I'm not at all discounting that. But on the other hand, you can't fully project a human complex emotion and relationship like love onto a dog because they can't reciprocate it in the same way a human can. I mean, this is why we're trying to do these imaging experiments, because the dog cannot talk to you, not in human speech. It can't say, yes, I love you too. It's okay. Although I know lots and lots of people think that's what their dog is telling them non-verbally. And maybe that is the case, but we don't know that for sure.
Sure. And what are some other common misconceptions about dogs, the secret life of dogs?
One of the things that I'm endlessly fascinated by is the relationship to TV, video. Because, so especially now we live our lives in front of these screens interacting with each other. So if you think about this is a remarkable cognitive ability that we have. We can look at images on a flat screen and kind of seamlessly use it as if the person was right here in front of us. Not quite seamlessly, but good enough, right? It's not clear that any other animal can do that. So most of the dogs in our project are not TV watchers, even though I would love to have some that do. And we've all had this experience where, we've tried to talk to our dog, through an iPad or, through FaceTime or whatever. And most dogs just do not react at all in the same way. Most don't even care or show any reaction. And so I'm fascinated by this to understand, well, why is that? So one possibility is that the images and sounds coming through our screens and devices are compressed. We know that. The video is compressed, the audio is compressed, so it does not look and sound exactly like real life. So as far as audio goes, it may sound very differently to dogs. They have different hearing sensitivities than we do.
Highly sensitive.
They're highly sensitive. They hear higher frequencies, and most of the audio on these devices is kind of compressed down to a lower range. So it probably just sounds very muffled.
Right.
I would think. The video is more complex because sometimes dogs will see an image on the TV and that will momentarily capture their attention, especially if there's an animal there. But most don't act like it's the real thing. They kind of look at it with some curiosity. And so we're trying to understand what is being lost in this translation. Is it that they don't have the capacity to do what we call symbolic representation? So symbolic representation is what we're doing right now. We're interacting with each other through a device. And so I take the images on the screen and the audio that I'm hearing to be stand-ins for the real thing. We're not sure if dogs can do that. So we're exploring the extent to which they can by showing them videos in the scanner, at least for the dogs that will tolerate watching it. Most of the dogs find it highly boring and usually after just a few minutes just leave.
Yeah, they voluntarily opt out of the study.
Yes, exactly.
A behavioral scientist who I really like said that what makes humans different from other animals is the capacity to imagine a future. And yet you seem to have some evidence, if I read it correctly, that dogs can imagine a future or can even engage in future planning. Is that true? And can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's right. So the way I think about this is from an evolutionary perspective. You ask the question, well, why do we have a brain? Why does any animal have a brain? So there's some interesting correlates. So first off, every animal that can move, which is basically every animal. Every animal that has muscles, as we know it, also has a brain. And there's almost a one-to-one correspondence between this. So insects have brains, they can move. And it's very likely that brains evolved in the first place to control movements as kind of the first step, if you will. And then as the world got more complex and more predators became present and these animals had to compete with each other for resources, then there was a pressure to evolve the capacity to outdo one another. This has probably been present, from the dawn of life. That is at the heart of Darwinian evolution. And so how do you do better than your competitor? How do you find those resources? How do you have reproductive success? How do you avoid being eaten? And the answer is by staying one step ahead of them. And so there's always been a strong evolutionary pressure to predict the future, if you will. So the way I think about brains is that these are predictive engines. They're prediction engines. That's why we have them. And a large function of every brain is to be running simulations of the future. Maybe it's only a second into the future, or in the case of humans, it could be years. But nevertheless, any animal with a brain, I guarantee you, is running some kind of little mini simulation and trying to stay one step ahead of the environment. So in that sense, yeah, dogs can predict the future. The question is how far in the future they are trying to predict. And I think that's where there is a big difference. Probably most of us would say that dogs can go into the future maybe a few seconds.
Not much.
Not much. I mean, they do have sense of time.
I was just about to ask that.
Yeah. I mean, all animals do that because there's cues in the environment. There's the light that changes during the day. There's bodily processes that tell them they're hungry or their bladder's filled. So they can kind of piece together these things. And if, in the before time when we used to go to work, then they would, anticipate when we were coming home. And that's all just kind of cobbling together different cues. So they do have a sense of time. Now, what we don't know and seems less likely is, are they thinking about their life, say, tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not a year from now. And it seems certainly almost the case that they probably do not worry about their own mortality like humans do.
Yeah. So cobbling together certain cues. I love what you just said, because that speaks to I imagine a lot of phenomena that occurs in the lives of dogs and cats, or most common domesticated pets, in terms of how they seem to anticipate our return home, the sound of a car, or any other cues. A lot of people think that there's almost a psychic ability of pets. Do you think it's a psychic ability, or perhaps just the cobbling together of certain cues, or both?
Well, I don't believe in kind of ESP and kind of the 70s version of ESP. But having lived, and currently living with a pack of dogs, I'm endlessly amazed at the things that they sense. And this actually, I think, speaks to why the early humans, started cohabitating with them, is because they can sense things that we can't. So Callie, the little rat terrier, I think has probably the best sense of hearing of all the dogs. And because she alerts to things before I can hear anything or before the other dogs do. And inevitably, whenever she kind of goes on a tear, there's something there. Usually, there's usually a deer or some other animal kind of going around in the woods behind our house. So in that sense, it's fair to say that having a dog, possibly a cat, extends our perception because the dog becomes a sensor for us. They are alerting us to things that they can hear or smell, perhaps, that we can't. So in that sense, I guess that's extrasensory perception of some sort, but not in the psychic way.
Enhanced sensory perception.
Sure. That may be why, early humans, kept them around because of that, because they make, fabulous guard animals. They can alert you. But as far as sensing when we come home, I think it is cobbling together all these cues because they know kind of the lighting conditions, the state of their tummy or their bladder. So they're kind of in a heightened state of anticipation, and then for sure they can hear your car coming down the road before you can or anyone else in the house can.
That's incredible. So they're constantly running these algorithms unbeknownst to us. What have been some other delightful findings that you've had about the secret lives of dogs that the listeners might take great pleasure in knowing?
One of the things that we did a couple of years ago was trying to delve into the question of language comprehension. Mm-hmm. It's super puzzling, right? Because dogs can learn things, commands. It's relatively easy to teach them simple things like sit and down. Harder, stay is harder. But then there are dogs who are just appear to be Einsteins and can understand 1,000 words. So the dog Chaser reportedly knew 1,000 words. She knew the names of 1,000 different objects and could retrieve them from another room just on command. And so the question is, well, what do dogs actually understand? So this is kind of like what I was talking about with video and audio. So when we use language, we're using words as abstract representations of the real world. So we can use these sounds, and in their written form, we know when I say car, everyone knows what I'm talking about. That's a word, and it serves as a placeholder for a whole category of car-like things. And then if I use a verb, you'll instantly know what the action is. But these are placeholders. They're abstract representations, highly abstract because they're only distantly related to the things and actions that they represent. So the question is, does a dog process language like that? In other words, as a placeholder, or are they processing it on a much lower level, just making simple sound associations? So literally the sounds coming out of my mouth are associated with something else. So that would be Pavlovian conditioning, not kind of higher level language processing. So we tried to use brain imaging to answer this question. And what we did was we took the dogs that were MRI trained, and then we taught them the names of 2 new toys that they had never seen before. And they were just given arbitrary names, presumably with words that they hadn't heard before either. And to prove that they knew what they meant, they had to go on command to the name toy. And this actually took a long time. It took most of the dogs 6 months to learn 2 names. I have some thoughts on why that's the case. Probably the main reason is that teaching older dogs new word associations is more difficult than teaching puppies to do it from an early age, which is what was done with Chaser, the dog who knew 1,000 words. But anyway, so after the dogs learned these 2 new words, then what we did was we brought them into the scanner and we had the owner speak these words. And as a control, we also had them speak gibberish words. And these are just like Jabberwocky words where, they sound like English, but they don't mean anything. And so that serves as a control. And so the question is, when we spoke the names of the objects, did the dogs visualize those objects like a human would? So if I say car, you might call up a mental image of a car. And if we actually did that experiment, we would probably find evidence of activity in your visual cortex, even if you weren't looking at it, because you can close your eyes and imagine things, and it repurposes the same circuits. So when we did it with dogs, we actually did not find evidence of that. And in fact, what we found was greater activity to the gibberish words than the trained words, which was very puzzling because that's also opposite to what we see in humans. And all of that tells me that although dogs understand some things that we say, they are not processing language the same way we do, which I don't think is terribly surprising because they don't speak. They don't speak, they don't have language. They communicate, but that's not the same as language. So they don't have the neural architecture for what we do. So you have an animal who might have some aspects of what we call receptive language, where they can understand some aspects of what we're saying, but they can't produce it. So that will look very different in a brain.
So Chaser had a vocabulary of 1,000 words. Absolutely incredible. Where was that information stored?
We have no idea, because I'd never scanned Chaser, even though Chaser only lived about 2.5 hours from me. And for a variety of reasons, we never were able to get her into the scanner. And then she passed away last year.
Sometimes my dog will greet a stranger enthusiastically, and the stranger infers, perhaps accurately, perhaps inaccurately, that the reason my dog is greeting with such great enthusiasm is because the stranger has a pet. Is that necessarily the case?
It's hard to say. I think a lot of times when we see that, they probably are sniffing out the scent of other animals. That seems the most logical explanation. And oftentimes the greeting that you get is because they are scenting you in some way. Now maybe it's because you have animals. Maybe it's because they're interested in what you just had for lunch. I think my dogs greet me that way, because oftentimes they'll go right for my mouth, and they'll say, like, "What have you been eating?"
Sure.
Because I want some of that. Will you vomit it back up so I can eat it? That's what wolves do, by the way.
They vomit up foods so that others can eat it?
Yes.
So this is actually a way of increasing the likelihood of survival and actually eating it twice, so to speak?
Well, that's what parents do. The wolf parents do for their pups when they go out hunting.
Amazing. And perhaps part of the reason that humans even established a relationship with the wolves was because the wolves were eating human excrement and other waste products. Is that part of?
I don't know. That's one theory of it. So that's like the garbage dump theory of domestication, that wolves just started hanging around human garbage dumps. There's probably an element to that. I think there's also kind of a close social match between dogs and wolves, or what would have been proto dogs at the time, where the social structures of our societies are close enough that they could mesh, at least. So I've interacted with some wolves, socialized wolves, at least. So wolves can be socialized to be around humans, but you have to do it from birth. And they still don't really like to be around humans, but they can tolerate it.
What was your perception of sharing company with a wolf? Was it pleasant for you, unpleasant for the wolf? What did you infer from just your experience?
My initial impression is these are big dogs. But then my second impression is they're not very interested in me. It's not like a dog would be. Their interest was initially trying to size me up, like, okay, who is this person and where are they in the social hierarchy, and what does that mean for me as a wolf? Because wolves seem to be very attuned to social hierarchies and kind of the power structure that is at play.
So I'm going to ask you to take a crack at something. I'm sure many dog parents have experienced what I'm about to describe. I'm crestfallen over the fact that my dog loves my wife way more than he loves me. I adore this guy. And I'm definitely number two, but a distant number two from the queen of his existence. Without knowing my dog, what might be a hypothesis as to why he is so crazy for her and less so for me?
So I actually have a colleague at work who kind of posed me with the same question. He was actually rather distraught by it. So kind of in the midst of the pandemic, he finally caved in to his children's wishes, and they adopted a dog. So now kind of with everyone at home. So I told him, I said, well, now everyone's at home. The dog can choose whoever they want to be with, because he's got him, his wife, and his 2 kids. I said, you just happen to be at the bottom of the ladder in terms of her preferences. So it's kind of the dogs have lots of choice now. The other thing, though, that I think I've seen is, men tend to have, louder voices, deeper voices, kind of more imposing. So there is that too. So one of the things actually I learned when I started training Callie for the MRI, which the dog trainer told me was, he said, I have to be more demonstrative. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, act, talk in a higher voice, be more emotional than you would normally. And, be more dynamic, because dogs react to that.
That's really good. Yeah. And my wife definitely does have the higher voice. And I am grateful to say he does at least love me a lot. He adores me. But it's just, wow, I am so envious, jealous of my wife's relationship with him. So I will do my best to follow that. That being said, what are some other great tips for dog owners?
So what I was going to say, the other thing, so with Callie, when we got Callie was actually probably more, because she was the one who picked her out from the shelter. And in fact, when she initially came home, I didn't even particularly like her, because she was just this scrawny terrier, and we'd never had a terrier before. And what changed was actually starting the dog project and doing things with her. So all of a sudden, now I was spending, it wasn't a huge amount of time, but it was every day we would work together for, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, just on this one thing. And then it got more complicated. And then, she was able to come to work with me and we'd do stuff together. So having kind of a common project, if you will, working together, totally changed my relationship with her. So, and I think it reminds us of what dogs are and where they came from. They did come from wolves, and doing things is in their DNA. Even your couch potato dog still likes to do things. So the more things that you can do together, the more chance you have for bonding.
Great point. Any other tips? Perhaps there's some common ideas around dog training that you may see a little bit differently. I'm just wondering what those might be.
I think, dog training theories are, they come and they go. Right now, we're in a positive training fad, which is not necessarily bad, but it just reminds us that, ever since people started writing books about how to train dogs, there have been many theories about it. So these days, I think I'm probably more agnostic about approaches. And I think, again, coming back to the idea that the dogs are individuals, that there is no one size fits all for training dogs. The all positive approach is great, but frankly, it doesn't work in all circumstances, and sometimes can be dangerous. So, for dogs like I have, Callie in particular, who has a death wish for cars, she will try to take down a car if she got off leash or escaped, which is problematic. And there's no, in that circumstance, there is no reward that I can offer that would outweigh her drive and interest in chasing down a car. So you have to be agnostic and open to a variety of approaches and whatever is necessary for the dog.
So that would be positive punishment that you'd need to give Callie in order to not, what people often refer to as negative reinforcement. Erroneously, it's actually positive punishment, and we don't need to get super geeky about behaviorism, but it sounds like you actually have to interject some punishment.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's positive punishment. And I'm not against that. I've seen it work with my dogs. So one thing that we've done to prevent the escape is we put down scat mats in front of the doors. And so these are These are just like just little mats that you put a 9-volt battery on. And if you step on it, you get a little shock.
Nothing that's going to harm the dog, but it will give a big message.
Not even a big message. It's more just like, it's a 9-volt battery. So it doesn't, it's more just surprising than painful. But I will tell you, and my dog trainer told me to do this. It only takes once. They stepped on it once. It's like, oh, I don't like that. So I'm not going to go near the door anymore. I'm not going to go, even if the door is open, I'm not going to cross that mat. And so just one aversive response, potentially can last a lifetime.
Wow,
and,
that's great.
Prevent the dog from running out an open door into the street. So to me, that is definitely a plus. So again, just I think in terms of dog training, you probably want to find and work with people who are not, who don't treat it as a religion, because it's not. You have to adapt. It's more like therapy.
Yeah. So rigidity around a particular way may be to our detriment, that we need to have flexibility, especially in light of what you described as individual differences, and really cater the training to the dog, not just give the dog whatever training, just kind of a cookie cutter approach.
That's right. I mean, even kind of with the all positive movement, which is great. I mean, it relies heavily on food as the reward. And with the MRI dogs, we've actually tried to back off using the food as part of the training, because we find that in the long run, it tends to interfere, I think, with what we're trying to accomplish, because sometimes, depending on how hungry or how excitable the dog is, they can just get really worked up over the food and not focus on whatever it is you're trying to teach them. And some things you just want them to do just because they like doing it, or if you can get them to that point. So that's how we are about the MRI training. We really want them to come into the machine and the facility just because it's fun. We try to make it fun. That's kind of the ethos of the whole project. It's like, look, a dog doesn't know what an MRI scanner is, so they have no prior associations with it. There's no possible way they could know what it is. So make it a game. Make it a fun time for them. And then they will associate that machine with having fun.
And we can extrapolate so much from that as parents of children who are trying to get our children to do things perhaps in a more Mary Poppins-esque way. If we can find a way to make a perhaps ostensibly aversive activity a chore, we can make it fun. That could be pretty brilliant. I know it's easier said than done, especially with humans.
That's right. Yeah.
What were you going to say?
No, I mean, humans are so difficult because we have all of these social influences too on what we think we're supposed to like, and sometimes we don't. But if I could offer one thing in terms of dog training, maybe it applies to children, although I doubt it, having 2 children of my own, is if you can get them to like things for what they are, not, for the doing of the thing, not necessarily for the reward at the end of it.
Intrinsic nature of the activity.
Yes. Goes by different names. You could call it flow, even, just the enjoyment for the sake of doing.
I'm a huge fan of flow. And for those of you listening, my basic equation for it is meaning paired with challenge. So if there's a way that you can find a way, if you can find the meaning in it, and if you can make it challenging, that might be another avenue. But I love flow. Are you speaking about Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work?
Yeah, exactly. And so, so early on when you asked me whether the dog project was an opportunity cost, it wasn't, because I dove into it and enjoyed it. Enjoyed it for its own sake, regardless of what the outcome was going to be.
That's so cool. And that makes so much sense. And I erroneously inferred that it could represent an opportunity cost. And it sounded like that was totally off the table. It was just intrinsically awesome. And for those of you listening, there's a great TED Talk by Daniel Pink, the author of Drive, who really kind of makes it fun to learn about intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards. What about cats?
I used to have cats.
And by the used to, I'm guessing that your relationship with animals has shifted in a way that you don't prefer to have them in your company.
Well, the last cat that I had had the unfortunate habit of urinating in the stove wells when we weren't home, and so the only way you would know that had happened is when you turn the burner on and vaporize the cat urine.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine that. It must have been hellacious. It must have seemed like a toxic gas used for warfare.
Yeah. So after that cat passed on, we kind of just went all in with dogs.
Sure. But might there be a similar love with human relationship for cats, or what are your thoughts on
that? So I know I'll anger all the cat people out there, but I don't think so. I mean, I think it's fundamentally different for a variety of reasons. So cats. So first off, cats were domesticated much later than dogs. So dogs, the domestication event was at least 11,000 years ago, but probably more like 15 or 20,000 years ago. Whereas cats, it's probably, I don't know, maybe 9,000, but probably somewhere 5 to 9,000. So dogs have several thousand, maybe 10,000 years more time with humans. So I think there's an evolutionary trajectory there that favors dogs. But I think it also comes down to kind of the fundamentally different social structures that dogs and cats have, or their wild counterparts have. Cats, most cat species are fairly solitary, except, lions live in prides, but that tends to be the exception. Most cats are solitary hunters, and they only come together to mate and then raise their young. So they don't quite have the same social drive as the dog family does. So we are working a bit against that there.
That makes sense. And since 2013, when you had your first fMRI study, have you done any new studies that were entirely different from the initial one?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. We're constantly adapting our experiments because, like I said, we've done all the easy things. So the language studies were kind of a complex set of experiments. We've dabbled a bit in olfaction to try to understand how they perceive various types of odorants. Although working in olfaction is technically very difficult because of the tendency for odorants to contaminate every surface that they come in contact with. So I tend to avoid those. Right now, I'm actually particularly taken with studying visual perception in the dogs to try to understand their representation of the world. And ultimately, what we're working on is, for lack of a better word, to try to build a brain decoder of sorts. So some of the dogs that we have in the project are very good at staying in the scanner, and they will watch images. So nowadays, we're using tools that pretty much everyone in neuroscience is using, as well as all science, and using big data machine learning approaches to link things that we're showing a dog on screen, let's say, with what's happening in their brain. And then if we can collect enough of that data, you can actually reverse the process. And so given a particular pattern of activity in the dog's brain, what is it that they're looking at, or potentially thinking, if we can push it that far. It's been done in humans, requires a ton of data, having a person in the scanner for hours and hours over different sessions, of course, but it takes a lot of data. But we're moving towards that direction with the dogs. I mean, so just a week or so ago, so Elon Musk, had a big news conference, showing his Neuralink device, which he had implanted in a pig. That's essentially what they're doing. But, we're trying to do something similar without doing implants. So we're trying to build a decoder for dog brains.
Very cool. So before I get to my final question, is there anything I should have asked Greg that I haven't yet asked?
No, I think we covered a lot.
We covered quite a lot. Okay. So you've kind of perhaps already spoken to it, but if budget were non-issue and you were just given carte blanche and you could study anything about dogs, what would it be?
Well, it's. I think we're doing what I would want to do, which is moving more and more towards this decoding idea. Because, like I said, I've been doing this almost now for 10 years with the dogs, and the technology continues to improve, and computational algorithms get more and more sophisticated. And so currently most of those are applied to kind of human research, but there's no reason why we can't use the same approaches to, gain enough information about how dogs' brains works and do this non-invasively without hurting them, to build a decoder of sorts. That's
so cool.
If anyone out there wants to, help in that endeavor, you can reach me.
Okay. Well, I've got a big Silicon Valley audience. It's possible that someone listening might do so. Greg, I just can't thank you enough for sharing your expertise, your experiences with dogs and neuroscience with my listeners. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.